to my channel. Today I have Surprised by Joy Chapter 3. Chapter 3, just in case you didn't know, this is a non-fiction book about C.S. Lewis's life. So he tells us here from the death of his mom and how the dad changed with him and his brother. So till he, I believe, because he was atheist at one point and then he became Christian. So this book should have, at the end of this book, about him gaining his faith and becoming a Christian. But I'm not sure. But that's what I believe. So oh, and by the way, I'm doing it without a microphone, because I had said that I'm trying to catch up fully and be organized and all that stuff. And right now, having the computer and the microphone would take me a little bit longer time. And right now, I just prefer just to do it with my phone. And regardless, my phone has a good camera, microphone, so we'll be doing that. And I have no nails. Gonna miss having my microphone so I can do this. Even though again, I could have used it. But I chose not to. I hope you're still getting the ASMR. And to be honest, I'm hoping that you guys like how I started this book, was reading the whole chapter for one video. I have extra tabs just in case if the chapter's extra long, then I know where to stop it. But so far, both of the videos for chapter 1 and chapter 2 have been about an hour. So let's get started because it's gonna take us a while. So chapter 3 is called Mount Bracken and Campbell. For all these fair people in the hall were in their first age, none happier under the heaven, their king, the men of noblest temper. It would be a hard task today to find so brave a fellowship in any castle. This was written by Gawain and the Green Knight. To speak of my nearer relatives is to remind myself how the contrast of Lewis and Hamilton dominated my whole early life. It began for me with the grandparents. Grandfather Lewis, deaf, slow-moving, humming his psalm chants, much concerned for his health and prone to remind the family that he would not be with them long, is contrasted with grandmother Hamilton, the sharp-tongued, sharp-witted widow, full of heterodox opinions, even the scandal of the whole connection, a home ruler, every inch a warrant indifferent to convention as only an old Southern Irish aristocrat could be, living alone in a large tumble-down house with half 100 cats. For company, to how many an innocent conversational gambit did she reply, You're talking great nonsense. Born a little later, she would, I think, have been a Fabian. She meant vague small talk with ruthless statements as ascertainable fact and well-worn maxim, with a tart demand for evidence. Naturally, people called her eccentric. Coming down a generation, I find the same opposition. My father's elder brother, Uncle Joe, with his family of 2 boys and 3 girls, lived very close to us while we were at the old house. His younger son was my earliest friend, but we drifted apart as we grew older. Uncle Joe was both a clever man and a kind and especially fond of me, but I remember nothing that was was said by our elders in that house. It was simply grown-up conversation about people, business, politics, and health, I suppose. But Uncle Gussie, my mother's brother, A.W. Hamilton, talked to me as if we were of an age. That is, he talked about things. He told me all the science I could then take in clearly, eagerly, without silly jokes and condescensions, obviously liking it as much as I did. He thus provided an intellectual background for my reading of H.G. Wells. I do not suppose he cared for me as a person half so much as Uncle Joe did, and that, call it an injustice or not, was what I liked. During these talks, our attention was fixed not on one another, but on the subject. His Canadian wife, I have already mentioned. In her also, I found what I like best: an unfailing, kindly welcome without a hint of sentimentally unruffled good sense, and the unobtrusive talent for making all things at all times as cheerful and comfortable as circumstances allowed. What one could not have wanted without and made the best of it. The tendency of the Lewises to reopen wounds and to rouse sleeping dogs was unknown to her as to her husband. But we had other kin who mattered to us far more than our aunts and uncles. Less than a mile from our home stood a largest house I then knew, which I will here call Mount Bracken, and there lived Sir W.E. Lady E. was my mother's first cousin, and perhaps my mother's dearest friend, and it was no doubt for my mother's sake that she took upon herself the heroic work of civilizing my brother and me. We had a standing invitation to lunch at Mount Bracken whenever we were at home. To this almost entirely we owed it that we did not grow up savages. The debt is not only to Lady E, Cousin Mary, but to her whole family. Walks, motor drives in those days, an exciting novelty. Picnics and invitations to theater were showered on us year after year with a kindness which our rawness, our noise, and our unpunctuality never seemed to weary. We were at home there almost as much as in our own house, but with this great difference, that a certain standard of manners had to be kept up. Whatever I know, it is not much of courtesy and savior fare I learned at Mount Bracken. Sir W. Cousin Quartus was the eldest of several brothers who owned between them one of the most important industrial concerns of Belfast. He belonged, in fact, to just that class of generation of which the modern man get his impressions through Galsworthy foresights, unless Cousin Quartus was very untrue to type. He may well have been. That impression is grossly unjust. No one less like Galsworthian character ever existed. He was gracious, childlike, deeply and religiously humble, and abounding in charity. No man could feel more fully his responsibility to dependents. He had a good deal of boyish gaiety about him. At the same time, I always felt that the conception of duty dominated his life. His stately figure, his gray beard, and his strikingly handsome profile make up one of the most venerable images in my memory. Physical beauty was indeed common of most of the family. Cousin Mary was the very type of the beautiful old lady, with her silver hair and her sweet southern Irish voice. Foreigners must be warned that this resembles what they call a brogue, about as little as the speech of a Highland gentleman resembles the Maslow slums, but it was the three daughters whom we knew best. All three grown up, but in fact much nearer to us in age than any other grown-ups we knew. And all three were strikingly handsome. H, the eldest and the gravest, was a Juno, a dark queen who at certain moments looked like a Jewess. K was more like a Valkyrie, though all I think were good horsewomen. With her father's profile, there was her face sometimes, something of the delicate fierceness of a thoroughbred horse, an indignant fineness of nostril, the possibility of an excellent disdain. She had what the vanity of my own sex calls masculine honesty. No man ever was truer friend. As for the youngest, G, I can only say that she was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, perfect in shape and color and voice and every movement, but who can describe beauty? The reader may smile at this as far off echo of a precocious calf love, but he will be wrong. There are beauties so ambiguous that they need no lens of that kind to reveal them. They are visible even to the careless and objective eyes of a child. The first woman who ever spoke to my blood was a dancing mistress at a school that will come in a later chapter. In some ways, Mount Bracken was like our father's house. There too we found the attics, the indoor silences and endless bookshelves. In the early days, when we were still only a quarter tamed, we often neglected our hostesses and rummaged on our own. It was there that I found books, ants, bees, and wasps. But it was also very different. Life there was more spacious and considerate than with us, gilded like a barge, or ours bumped like a cart. Friends of our own age, boy and girl friends, we had none. In part, this is a natural result of boarding school. Children grow up strangers to their next door neighbors, but much more it was the result of our own obstinate choice. One boy who lived near us attempted every now and then to get to know us. We avoided him by every means in our power. Our lives were already full, and the holidays too short for all the reading, writing, playing, cycling, and talking that we wanted to get through. We resented the appearance of any third party as an infuriating interruption. We resented even more bitterly all attempts, expecting the great and successful attempt made by Mount Bracken to show us hospitality. At the period that I am now speaking of, this had not yet become a serious nuance, but as it became gradually and steadily more serious throughout the school days, I may be allowed to say a word about it here and to get to the subject out of our way. It was the custom of the neighborhood to give parties which were really dances for adults, but to which nonetheless mere schoolboys and schoolgirls were asked. One sees the advantage of this arrangement from the hostess' point of view, and when the junior guests know each other well, a rare, free from self-conscious perhaps, they enjoy themselves. To me, these dances were a torment of which ordinary shyness made only a part. It was the false position which I was well able to realize. That tormented me, to know that one was regarded as a child and yet be forced to take part in an essentially grown-up function, to feel that all the adults presented were being being half mockingly kind and pretending to treat you as what you were not. Add to this the discomfort of one's eaten suit and stiff shirt, the aching feet and burning head, and the mere weariness of being kept up so many hours after one's usual bedtime. Even adults, I fancy, would not find an evening party very endurable without the attraction of sex and the attraction of alcohol, and how a small boy who can neither flirt nor drink should be expected to enjoy prancing about on a polished floor till the small hours of the morning is beyond my conception. I had, of course, no notion of social nexus. I never realized that certain people were in civility obliged to ask me because they knew my father or had known my mother. To me, it was all inexplicable, unprovoked persecution, and when, as often happened, such engagements fell in the last week of the holiday and rested from us huge candle of hours in which every minute was worth gold, I positively felt that I could have torn my hostess limb from limb. Why should she thus pester me? I had never done her any harm, never asked her to a party. My discomforts were aggravated by the totally unnatural behavior which I thought it my duty to adopt a dance, and that had come about in sufficiently amusing way, reading much and mixing little with children of my own age. I had, before I went to school, developed a vocabulary which must, I now see, have sounded very funny from the lips of a chubby urchin in an Eton jacket. When I brought out my long words, adults not unnaturally thought I was showing off. In this, they were quite mistaken. I used the only words I knew. The position was indeed the exact reverse of what they supposed. My pride would have been gratified by using such schoolboy slang as I possessed, not at all by using the bookish language which inevitably in my circumstances came naturally to my tongue, and there were no lacking adults who would egg me on with feigned interest and feigned seriousness, on and on till the moment at which I suddenly knew I was being laughed at. Then, of course, my mortification was intense, and after one or two such experiences, I made it a rigid rule that at social functions, as I secretly called them, I must never on any account speak of any subject in which I felt the slightest interest, nor in any words that naturally occurred to me, and I kept my rule only too well. A giggling and gurgling imitation of the babyest grown-up chatter, a deliberate concealment of all that I really thought and felt under a sort of feeble jocularity and enthusiasm, was henceforth my party manner, assumed as consciously as an actor assumes his role, sustained with unspeakable weariness, and dropped with a groan of relief the moment my brother and I at last tumbled into our cab. The drive home, the only pleasure of the evening, began. It took me years to make the discovery that any real human intercourse could take place at a mixed assembly of people in their good clothes. I am here struck by the curious mixture of justice and injustice in our lives. We are blamed for our real faults, but usually not on the right occasions. I was, no doubt, and was blamed for being a conceited boy, was usually attached to something in which no conceit was present. Adults often accuse a child of vanity without pausing to discover on what points children in general, or that child in particular, are likely to be vain. Thus, it was for years a complete mystery to me that my father should stigmatize as affectation my complaints about the itching and tickling and of new underclothes. I see it all now. He had in mind a social legend associating delicacy of skin with refinement, and supposed that I was claiming to be unusually refined. In reality, I was simple ignorance of that social legend, and if vanity had come into matter, would have been much prouder to have skin like a sailor. I was being accused of an offense which I lacked resource to commit. I was in another occasion called affected for asking what stirabout was. It is, in fact, a low Irish word for porridge. To certain adults, it seemed obvious that he who claims not to know the low must be pretending to be high. Yet the real reason why I asked was that I had never happened to hear the word. Had I done so, I should have picked myself on using it. Oldie school, you will remember, sank unlamented in summer 1910. New arrangements had to be made for my education. My father now hit upon a plan which filled me with delight. About a mile from the new house rose the large red bricks, walls, and towers of Campbell College, which had been founded for the express purpose of giving Ulster boys all the advantage of a public school education without the trouble of crossing the Irish Sea. My clever cousin, Uncle Joe's boy, was already there and doing well. It was decided that I should go as a boarder, but I could get an exit to come home every Sunday. I was enchanted. I did not believe that any Irish, even a school, could be bad. Certainly not so bad as I yet knew of England. To Campbell I accordingly went. I was at this school for so short a time that I shall attempt no criticism of it. It was very unlike an English public school that I had ever heard of. It had indeed prefects, but the prefects were of no importance. It was nominally divided into houses of the English pattern, but they were mere legal fictions, except the purpose of games, which were not compulsory. No one took any notice of them. The population was socially much more mixed than most English schools. I rubbed shoulders with farmer's son. The boy most nearly made a friend of was the son of a tradesman who had recently been going the rounds with his father's van. Because the driver was illiterate and could not keep the books, I much envied him this pleasant occupation, and he, poor fellow, looked back on it as a golden age. This time last month, Lewis, he used to say, I wouldn't have been going into preparation. I'd have been coming home for more rounds in a wheat tea cloth laid for me at one end of the table and sausage to my tea. I am always glad as a historian to have known Campbell, for I think it was very much what a great English school had been before Arnold. There were real fights at Campbell with seconds and I think betting and 100 or more roaring spectators. There was bowling too, though English school. Every boy held just in place with which his fist and mother wit could win for him. From my point of view, the great drawback was that one had, so to speak, no home. Only a few very senior boys had studies. The rest of us, except when seated at the table for meals or in a huge preparation room for evening prep, belonged nowhere. In out of school hours, one spent one's time either evading or conforming to all those inexplicable movements which a crowd exhibits, as it thins here and the thickens there, slow slackens its pace, and now sets like a tide in one particular direction, now seems about to dispense and then clods again. The bare brick passages echoed to a continual tramp of feet, punctuated with catcalls, scrimmages, gusty laughter. One was always moving on or hanging about in laboratories, in storerooms, in the great hall. It was very like living permanently in a large railway station. The bowling had this negative merit that it was honest bowling, not bowling consciously and authorized in a Mason tolerance of the prefectural system. It was done mainly by gangs, parties of 8 or 10 boys, each who scored those interminable corridors for prey. Their sorties, though, like the whirlwind, were not perceived by the victim till too late. The general endless confusion and clamor, I suppose, masked them. Sometimes capture involved serious consequences. 2 boys whom I knew were carried off and flogged in some backwater. Flogged in the most disinterested fashion, for their captors had no personal acquaintance with them, of art's sake. But on the only occasion when I was caught myself, my fate was much milder and perhaps odd enough to be worth recording. When I had come to myself after being dragged at a headlong speed through a labyrinth of passages which took me beyond all usual landmarks, I found that I was one of several prisoners in a low, bare room, half lit, I think, by a single gas jet. After a pause to recover their breath, 2 of the brigands led out the first captive. I now noticed that a horizontal row of pipes ran along the opposite wall, about 3 feet from the floor. I was alarmed but not surprised when the prisoner was forced into a bending position with his head under the lowest pipe, in the very posture for execution. But I was very much surprised a moment later. You will remember that the room was half dark. The 2 gangsters gave their victim a shove, and instantly no victim was there. He vanished without a trace, without sound. It appeared to be sheer black magic. Another victim was let out again. The posture for a flogging was assumed. Again, instead of flogging, dissolution, annihilation. At the last, my own turn came. I too received the shove from behind and found myself falling through a hole or hatch in a wall into what turned out to be a coal cellar. Another small boy came hurling after me. The door was slammed and bolted behind us, and our captors, with a joyous whoop, rushed away for more booty. They were no doubt playing against a rival gang with whom they would presently compare hags. We were let out again presently, very dirty and rather cramped, but otherwise none the worse. Much of the most important thing that happened happened to me at Campbell was that I there read Sohrab and Rustum in form under an excellent master whom we called Okti. I loved the poem at first sight and have loved it ever since, as the wet fog in the first line rose out of the Ox's stream. So out of the whole poem there rose and wrapped me around an exquisite silvery coolness and delightfulness, quality of distance and calm, a grave melancholy I hardly experienced then. I have since learned to do the central tragedy that what enchanted me was the artist in pecking with his ivory forehead and pale hands, the cypress in the Queen's garden, the backyard glance at Rustum's youth, and the peddlers from Kabul, the husband Khorasmian waste Arnold gave me at once, and the best Arnold gives me still, a sense not indeed of passion, passionless vision, but of a passionate silent gazing at things a long way off. And here observe how literature actually works. Critics say that Sohrab is a poem from classics to be enjoyed only by those who recognize the Homeric echoes. But I, in Okti Forum Room and the Okti BPs, knew nothing of Homer. For me, the relation between Arnold and Homer worked another way. When I came years later to read the Iliad, I liked it partially because it was, for me, reminiscent of Sohrab. Plainly, it does not matter at what point you first break into the system of European poetry. Only keep your ears open and your mouth shut, and everything will lead you to everything else. In the end, ogni parte splendid. About halfway through my first and only term at Campbell, I felt ill and I was taken home. My father, for reasons I do not quite know, had become dissatisfied with the school. He had also been attracted by accounts of preparatory school in the town of Whitburn. Though quite connected with Whitburn College, especially by the convenience that it went. If I went there, my brother and I could still do the journey together. Accordingly, I had a blessed 6 weeks at home with a Christmas holidays to look forward to at the end, and after that I knew a new adventure. In a surviving letter my father writes to my brother, and I think myself lucky, but he fears I shall be very lonely before the end of the week. It is strange that having known me all my life, he should have known me so little. During these weeks, I slept in his room and was thus freed from solitude during most of those dark hours in which alone solitude was dreadful to me. My brother being absent, he and I could not lead one another into mischief. There was, therefore, no friction between my father and myself. I remember no other time in my life such as untroubled affections. We were famously snug together, and in the days when he was out, I entered with complete satisfaction into a deeper solitude than I had ever known. The empty house, the empty silent rooms were like refreshing bath after the crowded noise of Campbell. I could read, write, and draw to my heart's content. Curiously enough, it is at this time, not in early childhood, that I chiefly remembered delighting in fairy tales. I felt deeply under a spell of beard dwarves we had in those days before Arthur Rackham sublimed or Walt Disney vulgarized in Earthman. I visualized them so intensely that I came to the very frontiers of hallucination. Once walking in the garden, I was for a second not quite sure that a little man had not run past me into the shrubbery. I was faintly alarmed, but it was not like my night fears. A fear that guarded the road to Fairy was one I could face. No one is a coward at all points. So that's the end of chapter